Hello and welcome to live podcast on clean windows, learning to see what we can't. And we have Tom Kunz and Mark Boersma here with us today. If you guys could take a couple minutes and tell us a little bit about yourselves, that would be great.
I'd start with Tom
Why
because
don't we start with
he's
Mark? Oh,
Mark.
okay.
I think Tom's a lot more
Whichever one of
interesting.
you wants to go first.
So Tom, you can get started. You tell us a little bit about yourself, Tom.
All right. Well, I've basically been in the real estate sales or real estate franchise business for about 58 years, 59 years. Spent 30 of those years with Century 21. Came as a manager, left as president, CEO worldwide for them, and then had a 2-year kind of non-compete agreement when I left. And when that was done, I was approached by a company called Engel and Volkers. It's a luxury franchise company out of Hamburg, Germany. And I'm the executive vice president with them. I've been with them now going on 13 and a half years, I think. And so, yeah, it's been interesting. Mark and I go back to my Century days and everything that going forward. So I've enjoyed all of our conversations.
Yeah, Tom and I met. We were doing a project, co-authoring a book, Community Business Partnerships. And so that was kind of the start of the friendship. And that's been, I think, over 20 years now. So it's been a while. It's been a lot of fun. This is my 18th book that I've written or co-authored, titled Clean Windows, Learning to See Things We Can't See. And so we have my wife and I, we just celebrated last year our 40th anniversary. We have 7 kids and 10 grandkids, and I now own 9 companies and still have 20 to 30 hours of free time a week. So I have so much free time, I don't know what to do with it. And so one of the things I do is write books. This book has been, without question, the hardest of all the 18 other 17 books that I've written. And I think I've probably written over 250 pages, 4 different versions, and I just keep starting over. And so I'm hoping that Tom can give us some clarity so I don't have to start over again. One of the things that I'm struggling with is that it seems like in today's society, people are really confident in their belief system and what they're seeing is accurate. It's like they're not even open to anybody else's perspective. Do you have any thoughts on that, Tom?
You know, I do. No, I think I'm 76 years old. And so in those 76 years, I don't know that I've ever seen our country so divided. And it all kind of stems, I guess. I think it kind of started with politics, but I think it's gone way past that process now. And it's almost a lifestyle of finding something that is controversial and then just starting to drive your views and not listening to anybody else's views on any of it. And I think that at some point, if we don't get this rectified in some way, or people start to understand how the process is, it could be extremely detrimental to not only the country, but to individuals themselves. And we're seeing a lot of it. I mean, we saw it in the last couple of weeks with the death of that gentleman from the insurance industry. No reason for it. I mean, it's just because. And the same way with the Israelis and all that process. So yeah, we need to have a little bit more understanding as to how people think. And it's interesting because you and I have always been interested more in probably what other people think than what we actually think. And yeah, it's kind of interesting to me.
On Chanton and Tom, I was referring to a story Tom and I had, I don't know, maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years ago. I don't know if Tom remembers it, but I do. And I was on a podcast, and I guess my natural energy wasn't there or something. And Tom says, "Everything okay?" I'm like, "No, not really." And he's like, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, there's this CPA I've been partnering with for 2 years, and we've been developing a program, and it's just, he just quit. Like, he didn't follow through on his commitment." And he's like, "Okay, so you're frustrated?" I'm saying, "Yeah, I'm frustrated." He says, "Why?" I'm like, "Well, Tom, because I spent 2 years, like, I was getting frustrated with Tom. I'm like, what do you mean, why?" And so I told him again, "Well, I spent 2 years with this CPA, and he quit. He didn't follow through. He has no integrity." It's like, he's like, "Okay, so why are you frustrated?" And then I was getting perturbed, and I told him again, and then he asked the same question like 4 times, really irritating. And finally I said, "I don't know what you mean, Tom. Like, what are you talking about?" And so, like, I'm thinking one way, I'm seeing the picture one way. like this, this is not good. This like weighs 2 years and blah blah blah. I mean, it's just, and he just kind of chuckled and he says, "Well, Mark, was it a good idea?" I'm like, "Well, yeah." And he's like, "Are there other CPAs out there?" And it just stopped me in my tracks. And I'm like, "Stop your whining, Mark, and get out there." Like, it just changed me just radically when we wrote our book, 20 years ago. Tom relates a story. I think when he was 9 years old or something, his dad had a gas station, a service station. And, I wish Alvin Miller was on, because he's he's 83 and he has so many stories about his childhood. So I wonder, Tom, if you hanging out with your dad and all the older gentlemen, going out and hanging out with them, I wonder if the story of like the service station, like I wonder if those like I wonder if everybody has those types of stories.
Oh, I
But I
think they
want,
do. And
but
it's interesting because when I came on today and I saw your clean windows
uh-huh.
and saw the soap on it, that the issue that I think you're talking about, I mean, it just literally popped into my head. And that was, can I tell the story?
Yeah, yeah,
So I don't know, like Mark said, I was 8 or 9 years old, and my dad had service stations, and service stations are usually on a corner, and they have a lot of blacktop. But this is when service stations were service stations that check your oil and water and tires and wash your windows and do all the other stuff. And my dad was a clean freak. And my job was to come down on Saturdays and what he called wash the drive down, clean the drive. We had 5 miles of hose that I'd watered with. And I knew he was going to look under the garbage cans and under the little hose thing that would ring the bell. So when I got through, I said, "Okay, I'm done." And so sure enough, he came out, he checked everything over, and he goes, "Did a pretty good job," but he said, "Come with me." And he walked me out in the street. And he said, "Now turn around and tell me what you see." And I said, "I see the dirt in the gutter." He goes, "Yeah." He said, "You spent all that time washing that thing down, thinking that consumers coming into our service station was going to really see a clean, nice place. But what you didn't do was look through their eyes, because the first thing they're going to see is the dirt in the gutter." And so he said, "Son, what you need to understand, no matter what product or service you're going to get involved in your career, you always have to take a few seconds whenever you're going to meet with your potential client or customer, and you have to look through their eyes as to what do they want to see. You have to hear through their ears as to what they're wanting you to say, and you have to look through their mouth as to what they're going to say to you. And if you can put yourself in their mind, you'll have a better opportunity to give them what they're really looking for." And that has stuck with me my whole time.
And that's where I think it's just strange to me. Like when you told me that story, 20 years ago, not only did it make it in the book, it was like the first part of the book. And it stuck with me. And I thought, you know, here's Tom. And when he shared this story, I don't know, it was 50 years later. And it was like yesterday. Like it stuck with him. And Alvin Miller is the same way. It's like he has these stories of his dad. His dad owned a lumber mill. He's got some of the most fascinating stories.
Well, I'll bet.
Yeah, and he was raised Amish, and so he's just like, it's interesting because I meet with him. I get a chance. He's local here, so I get a chance to come out and meet with him and Mel, the owner of Blue Gate Theater, and Ernie, the owner of uh, Woodland Lawn, I think it is, RV. So all three of these guys are in their 80s, very successful businessmen. And they've been friends for like 70 plus years, like their whole life. And came in and I was talking with Alvin. I said, how do you have significant conversations? So I'm 60 years old. And I'm like, Alvin, how do I have, significant conversations with people? He's like, Mark, with some people you can't. And you know me, you know me, Tom, when somebody says I can't do something, that always makes me excited because I'm like, I'm going to figure out how. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, Mark, to have a significant conversation, you have to be vulnerable, and some people will never be vulnerable. And I had never connected those two things, like significant conversations with vulnerability. Like I'd never connected the dots. And I told him, I'm like, that's crazy. And so I'm like wondering, like when you tell the stories, when Alvin tells the stories, and when there's other stories that are told, like it seems like people are like, oh, that's a nice story, but they don't really think about the story. I mean, they don't really say, well, was there something my parents taught me when I was 8 years old that changed my life forever? And they don't think about that. Tom has another story of when he was a teenager, and his grandpa Chappelle went ahead and said something to him as a teenager. And it's like, when I heard that story, I'm like, man, like, that's a crazy story. And
Talking
so,
about the write it down.
yeah. See, and so there's grandparents that are going to be on, like, this is something I think significant, like learning to see things we can't see. And so,
Mark,
yeah,
I just had a thought.
yeah.
The one of the reasons I think young people my age um, aren't open to learning to see things that they can't, and they're so set on their perspective is because a lot of them that aren't Amish don't have those stories. They weren't taught they weren't taught a work ethic or life lessons at a young age because they were sat in front of a TV.
See, I think everybody's got stories though. John Henderson, another mentor of mine, and he said you can learn more from a bad leader than you can a good leader. And so if that's true, well, you could learn more from a bad parent than a good parent. like, like, so I think that everybody's got stories. I think it's like, it was interesting. Like Mary Jo was interviewing Roseanne and I in a podcast for marriages. And it's a really cool podcast. And it dawned on me that children look at their parents' marriage differently than the parents look at the marriage, and they remember things that the parents don't remember, and they have a view of the parents' marriage or growing up or the family that the parents don't have. They have a different perspective. And I thought, I wish somebody would have told that to me, 36 years ago when Ginger Ann was just born. Or Mark, every year you probably ought to sit down with your kids and just say, what do you think of Mom and I's marriage? And what do you think of the family? And what do you think of, like, I should have done that every year with my kids, but nobody told me.
It's interesting, Mark, you should say that, because I think I told you this too. When my kids were, when I was starting to have kids, was about the time that the VCR came out. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, because I had it. It was one of those big things that you almost like a TV camera, right? And I used to take all pictures of all the meeting, all the family stuff we'd do and whatever. And it dawned on me one time that what I needed to do was to have a dedicated, video thing for each of the kids. And I would take 15 minutes every month with each of the kids by themselves. So they each had their own tape. And I remember talking with my wife at the time about it, and we were kind of laughing. But it's interesting now that those kids now have taken those videos and turned them into CDs, and now you basically can see them growing up and I should have done it longer, but we stopped at a certain age, but you can literally see them growing up, not only in the way that they talk, but the way they look and the way they act. It was just amazing. And then my daughter did it with my dad, and sit down with him and had him go back and tell all of the life stories of things that had happened to him and the things that he had seen in his lifetime and what had changed and so on. I would recommend that to anybody who's listening, that you should do that not only with your kids, but you should do it with your parents or your grandparents or whoever, to have that ability to look back and let your kids understand where they came from.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Grandpa Chappelle, story, as a teenager, it's like every teenager can learn from this. Every grandparent can learn from this. And so I'd love for you to share that story, Tom.
Well, as you all know, your parents always had something to tell you that, you do something and they would say, you really need to think about this. And they'd give you a little piece of their mind. And my grandfather told me one time I was doing, he goes, he said, I'm going to give you some recommendations here, but I would prefer to have you write them down in a notebook. And anybody else that comments on anything that you do, because you're not going to understand it now. You're going to look at it as almost criticisms, or, why are they telling me this? Or you're just going to blow it off and go about your way. But he said at some point in your life, you're going to open that notebook up and you're going to walk down through all of those comments that have been made to you and suggestions. And he says, I guarantee you it will help you in your life as you move forward, because now you'll start to understand what the true meaning that they were trying to do. What was the meaning of why they told me this? And how would it have impacted my life had maybe I had even looked at it at that point as I'm looking at it today, and how much further along the line of life I would have been if I had actually done that. Is that the story you're talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, write it down, because it's not going to mean something to you now, but it will later. Like Tim, he and I were talking, and he's been through some tough things, really tough things. But he and I were talking last week, I think it was. And so now he's 24 years old. When he was 5 years old, 6 years old, 5 to 8, he would jump on an early morning podcast with Tom and I. And Tim was not an early morning kid. Like he just wasn't. But he'd ask the coolest questions. He'd be like Mr. Kunz, like, what is energy? And it's like, where is he coming up? But the best question that Tom and I probably like the most, he's like, Mr. Kunz, I have 4 older sisters. It's like, okay. And he says, how can I make them all happy? And Tom and I just look at each other and like, we don't know the answer to that. We can't like, and it's just, and so Tim was talking to me and he says, Dad, it's weird. It's like everything you shared growing up. It's like, I wish I'd have listened to you because it's becoming clear. Like everything you said is like true. He said, I used to look at you as a villain. He says, now I look at you as a hero. Like you're willing to share things with me and other people, that, they didn't want to hear. I didn't want to hear it at the time. And like, it's like, if you have anybody in your life that cares for you more as a person than they care for the relationship, hold on to that person tight because there's not very many people. What I mean by that is that most people aren't going to tell you the truth because they don't want to risk the relationship. But if you can find somebody that's willing to tell you something that's going to risk the relationship, it's a very unusual person. There's not a lot of those kind of people out there. So we go from teenagehood, none of this is written down. Tom and I just show up and it just flows. So you go from being a teenager to Tom probably in his 20s, I'm guessing, might have been 30s. The claim unclaimed territory, Tom?
Yep.
Can you share that story?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, it's interesting. I had a call about an hour before this one, and that was applicable to that call. I actually just told that story. But when I joined Century 21, I came in as a manager.
So
And the
how
first
old would
week,
you have been?
25 or something around there.
Okay, got it.
It's a long time ago. And the very first week I was there, I mean, from the very first day, I kept hearing this gentleman's name. And so finally, after about the third day, I said, I got to go see who this guy is. So I went up to where his office was. He was out of town. And so I thought, well, what the heck? So I had his assistant make an appointment for me. So the following week, I went up to the appointment and he was sitting in his chair. I'll never forget this. And he's looking at me and he goes, I have 2 questions. So the first question is, who the hell are you? And the second question is, why are we having this meeting? And I said, well, Marty, his name was Marty Reuter. I said, Marty, the reason we're having this, first of all, I'm Tom Kunz and I'm, new to the company. I just got here last week. You were out of town. But I said, all week long, all I've heard is your name on almost everything. And so the reason for the meeting is I want to know what your secret is. And he looked at me and slid his chair back and he goes, what do you mean? I said, well, you obviously impress people and everybody knows your name. Why is that? And he thought for a minute. I think he was probably deciding, should I give it to him or not give it to him? And if I give it to him, is he even going to understand what the heck I'm talking about? And this is what he said. Claim all unclaimed territory. And he was probably right. I sat there for a minute thinking, I said, what, Marty, what do you actually mean by that? He said, look, he says, if the company, let's say, lays somebody off, but they haven't replaced that person, he said, just take it over, start doing the job. I said, even if I said, yeah, it doesn't matter, just do the job. Somebody's got to do it. And he says, if you see something that needs to be done and nobody seems to want to do it, just do it. Just claim it, take it and run with it. He said, now you may never get additional pay for it, and you may never get the actual responsibility. But he said, if you do that, I can guarantee you at some point, and probably multiple points in your career, there are going to be the people that you report up to, or the people that are running the company, are going to be sitting around the table coming up with a new idea or a new thing that they want to do, and they're now saying, who could we get to run this? And he's like, guarantee you your name will come up. And I can attest to you that from that day forward, I did claim all unclaimed territory, and it is probably 95% of the success that I've had in taking jobs that I would probably never really 100% qualified for, but I claimed it and I went into it and I made it happen. And so claim all unclaimed territory.
So another story is when Tom, I don't know, maybe when he was in high school or college or something early, or probably before that, I'm pretty sure you were working at a truck or trailers. You were loading trailers, and the union or some of the people came up and
Oh,
said,
no, I was working for the railroad.
railroad, okay.
So it was, I actually had two different jobs at two different times. I was going to school and actually had running a couple of small businesses too. But the one was what they called a carman. These are the people that work and repair and clean the box cars. The other one was the ones that work on the engines, and there's whole nother stories over there. But the first week I was there, they had 5 boxcars lined up outside the shop there, and they were redoing them. They were going in and repairing the dents and putting new floors in them and cleaning them all up and putting new wheels in and all that stuff. So my job was to go out and sand the floors in each of the cars. And so I went out there and started doing what they told me to do. I'm sanding all the the floors in the box cars. And about the second or third day, I can't remember, second day, the foreman came out to me and grabbed me and he goes, "So what are you doing?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "There's 5 cars here." He said, "This job is supposed to last all week." I said, "Well, I don't understand, sir." I said, it doesn't take a whole day to sand one of these down. I can do one in about a half a day, and so I can get 2 done, in a day. And and he goes, "And then what are you going to do on Thursday or Friday when you don't have anything to do?" I said, "Well, I would assume you'd have something else for me to do." He goes, "That's not the way it works." Oh, I don't. Maybe this isn't the one you're talking about.
No, that's the one. Yep.
And he said, "Listen, son," he said, "we're a union here." And he said, "This is the way we work. This is a week's worth of work. You need to slow it down and make sure that that's the way it is." And I'll never forget, I walked away from that. I actually went home and talked to my dad about it, and actually talked to my grandfather because he actually worked at the railroad too. And it's been interesting over my life how many times in different industries that I've seen that kind of attitude. It's not do the best job, it's do the job the way we've described it in the timetable we've described it, not in how you could get it done. And so it kind of fits in with that, claim all unclaimed territory, because when I see that kind of thing happening, I tend to jump in and do it the way that I would do it. And I think that's also kind of pushed me up the ladder a little bit too.
Oh, there's so many other stories. I think we'll close with one more. We definitely need to get Tom back on again. I know Mary Jo was talking to me pre-show. And so Tom is the first one. I'd been thinking a while about the personalities and putting it into a mobile app, but nobody had talked to me about it. And we were out in Nashville we were out in Nashville doing an event for the book. And Tom said, "Mark, his Life Masteries, if you guys talked about putting that personality stuff into a mobile app." And I'm like, "They haven't, but I've been thinking." He's like, "You ought to do that. That would be." So we need to get, so Mary Jo is actually leading that effort up. in putting clean windows into the Life GPS mobile app, which is a personality assessment. It'll identify your personality in 17 seconds, and then it can grid out your personality and others. And then there's posts and different communications and questions. So you can actually build and collaborate with teams and other like-minded people to be able to learn to see things that we're not seeing. But the final story is what I call the golf pro story. And how old were you when that happened, Tom?
Oh, I was probably 30s or 40s, maybe even 50. Yeah, it's a relatively new deal.
Gotcha. Share that story because that's a fun one.
Well, as I'm probably not the only one like this, and my wife keeps teasing me that no matter what thing I get into, it's like there's always porch packages. So I tend to buy everything, like cameras and all kinds of stuff. But I've been playing golf most of my life, actually. I wasn't any good at it. And so because I would buy, the newest driver or the best golf ball or the whatever that, I'd see the ads on. And so one time I decided, you know what, I'm going to go take a lesson from a professional and figure out how to really make, improve my game. So I hired this guy. It wasn't cheap, but I hired him. And so we come out and we shake hands and do the niceties and all that. And he goes, so Tom, he says, is that your set of clubs? And I said, yeah. He said, I want you to hand me the club that probably has never been out of the bag, or when it is out of the bag, you never know where the ball is going to be going. I said, sir, that could be almost every one in there. That's why I'm here. He goes, I know there's one in there like that. And there was. So I pulled it out. I gave it to him. And he stepped up, he dropped the ball, took that club and swung it, and it hit that ball and it just sailed out there. I mean, way out there. Landed, bounced, and rolled and stopped. And then he took the club and he turned around to me and he goes, now we know it's not the clubs. And I looked at him and I thought, I hired the right guy. He knew what everybody does. They blame it on the club or the grip or whatever the deal is, and he knew how to make that difference.
It's a magical story because I think it's become in vogue to go ahead and blame your parents or your grandparents or the school or the principal or the teachers or the boss or the government. Like it's always blaming somebody else, and never taking ownership. And it seems like it's a pandemic. It seems like it's a way of thinking where it's not my fault, or I'm going to explain why I did things or why I'm not learning things. And it's like, if we don't take ownership, if we don't take personal ownership of things in our lives, we can't learn. Like we just can't. We're not going to see things. So, Tom, thanks so much for being on. Mary Jo, thanks so much for, making this happen and your leadership in clean windows. And look forward to having Tom back again as a guest, as well as other leaders and other thought leaders and other individuals that it's almost like, Tom, my hope is that if people hear stories that it will help the younger generation with their kids, grandkids, and that they'll also think back and say, what stories did I have of my parents or grandparents that maybe I didn't listen to? Or even if we had bad parents or bad grandparents, we can still learn something. Like there's something in our childhood that there are many things in our childhood that are significant. And it's almost like it sets the pattern. Are we going to go forward in life to be a perpetual, lifelong student? Or are we going to go forward in our life and think we know everything? It seems like it's one of those two things. Mm-hmm. And if we go ahead and go forward in life thinking we know everything, it seems like the older you get, the harder it is to change that way of thinking. and that's not going to work out good for anybody. So thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Always fun.
Well, Mary Jo and Mark, I appreciate you inviting me. It's always great to get together with you, Mark. You get me thinking about things I haven't thought about in a long time. And for some reason, and Mary Jo, I'm sure you've seen this with Mark, when you walk away from a conversation with Mark Boersma, a lot of stuff becomes a lot clearer. And it has always been that way from the day one when we met up until today. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, it was great to
Merry
meet.
Christmas to you all. Hope you all have great holidays.
Thank you. You too, Tom. Thank you, Mary Jo.
You.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.